All right, everyone, we're going to get started in just a minute. If you have not already done so, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're calling in from. Thank you for your patience. We'll get started in just a minute.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to have you here. We're going to go ahead and get started. So happy to have folks joining us this evening. I am Mary Bauer. I am the Executive Director of the ACLU of Virginia, and I am so honored to welcome you to our Reproductive Freedom Forum. It's no small thing for you all to take time out of your busy lives on a weeknight evening. It speaks volumes about your commitment to the cause of reproductive freedom in Virginia. Whether you're a first-time participant or a long-standing supporter, your presence here is crucial as we work together to protect and expand the rights of all Virginians. We are, as you know, living in a time when our fundamental freedoms are under attack, and the right to make decisions about our body is no exception. But we're not here to feel discouraged. We're here to do something about it. The forum is designed to arm you with the knowledge and the tools you need to make a real difference in the fight for reproductive justice in our state. Tonight, we're going to delve into what reproductive freedom really means. We're going to discuss the importance of a constitutional amendment in Virginia. And most importantly, we are going to identify ways that each of us can contribute to this critical movement. This isn't just about learning, it is about doing. By the end of our summit, I hope you'll feel empowered and ready to take that next step, whether it's sharing the Reproductive Freedom Pledge with your network or mobilizing your community to support this cause. And I want to take just a moment to mention another important way you can support our efforts, and that's by becoming a member of the ACLU of Virginia. Membership not only strengthens our collective voice in defending civil liberties, but it helps sustain our ongoing work to protect reproductive rights and other fundamental freedoms. If you're not already a member, I encourage you to join and be part of this powerful movement dedicated to justice and equality for all. You can check out the link in the chat of this webinar or learn more by going to www.acluva.org/join. And I want to give a special thanks to our incredible speakers and moderators who've worked tirelessly to make tonight's event possible. We're going to hear from some really inspiring voices, and I'm confident that their insights will resonate with each of you. Before we dive into the program, I want to remind you that your participation doesn't end when this webinar does. The fight for reproductive freedom is ongoing. Every action you take matters. So let's get started. Together, we can secure the future of reproductive rights here in Virginia. Thanks for being here. I'm going to turn it over now to Matteo Gasparotto, who will be leading a roundtable discussion on reproductive freedom. Matteo?
Hey, thanks for that great intro, Mary. Hey all, I'm Matteo Gasparotto. I'm a campaign organizer with the ACLU of Virginia, and I'll be moderating our roundtable discussion tonight. I'm thrilled to be here with two incredible voices in the fight for reproductive freedom. Jerry Greenspan, a senior staff attorney here with us at the ACLU of Virginia, and Kenda, a leader in the movement for reproductive justice and the executive director of Birth and Color. Excuse me. Before we dive into our conversation, I want to remind everyone that this discussion is meant to be interactive. We encourage everybody to use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and we'll do our best to address as many as possible. Let's start by defining what we mean when we talk about reproductive freedom and reproductive justice. These terms are used sometimes interchangeably, but they have distinct meanings and implications for our work. Jerry, could you start off by explaining what reproductive freedom means in the context of Virginia?
Yeah, thanks, Matteo. And hi, everybody. It is so great to be here with you all this evening. As Matteo said, I'm a senior staff attorney here at the ACLU of Virginia and handle a lot of our legal work related to reproductive freedom and reproductive rights. And so what do we mean when we talk about reproductive freedom? Essentially, we are talking about the fundamental right of every individual to make personal reproductive decisions without governmental interference. So this includes the right to decide for yourself whether and when to have a child, the right to access reproductive health care like contraception, abortion, fertility treatment, pre- and postnatal care, and the right to raise children in safe and healthy environments. Securing the right to reproductive freedom means ensuring that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, has the ability to control their reproductive lives, free from discrimination, free from coercion, and free from government interference. And in Virginia, this right is not secure, which is why our work, especially our work towards an amendment to Virginia's state constitution, is so important, and why we at the ACLU of Virginia are doing that work.
Cool. Thanks, Jerry. Now, Kenda, you've been a strong advocate for reproductive justice. Can you help us understand how reproductive justice differs from reproductive freedom and why it's such a critical framework for our work?
Sure. And it's been a pleasure to be here and share space with you all this evening. Reproductive freedom and reproductive justice are related but distinct concepts in the context of reproductive rights. Reproductive freedom typically refers to the right to make decisions about one's own reproductive health care without interference. This includes the right to access contraception, abortion, IVF, and the list goes on. It's often framed within the context of individual autonomy and legal rights, emphasizing the importance of personal choice and privacy. Reproductive justice, on the other hand, expands on the concept of reproductive freedom by addressing broader social, economic, and racial factors that impact people's ability to exercise reproductive rights. This framework emphasizes the intersectionality of reproductive issues. It considers how the systemic inequalities such as racism, poverty, and the lack of access to healthcare affects people's reproductive choices and outcomes. In essence, reproductive freedom focuses on individual rights and access to reproductive health services, while reproductive justice broadens this perspective to include social, economic, and political conditions that affect reproductive choices and aims to address these inequalities to ensure that all people can fully exercise their reproductive rights. Reproductive justice seeks to create an environment where everyone has resources and support they need to make informed and autonomous decisions about their own reproductive lives.
Cool. Thanks, y'all, for those helpful and powerful explanations. So let's pivot a bit and let's talk a little bit about what this looks like in practice here in Virginia. Jerry, how are reproductive rights currently being challenged in our state, and what are the most pressing issues that we need to address?
Yeah, that is a great question. So of course, in Virginia, abortion is still legal even after Roe v. Wade was overturned with the Dobbs decision. So we do still have access to abortion in Virginia. But this is subject at this point to who holds power in our state government. We have seen in the past few years since the Dobbs decision came down and Roe was overturned, continuous efforts to restrict reproductive freedom in Virginia, including legislation that was introduced and so advocated for by our current governor that would ban abortion in Virginia. Fortunately, that legislation was unsuccessful. We are lucky that we, since Roe was overturned, have had at least one chamber of our government that held a pro-reproductive freedom majority. But that could change here in Virginia. Just this past session, our governor refused to sign legislation that would have created a right under state law to contraception. So that right is still protected at the federal level, but as we've seen, our federal rights are also subject to attack and to change. So these threats are real. We see them, coming to pass in other states where abortion is banned, where, IVF has come under attack and contraception has come under attack. And, those efforts could be successful here in Virginia with a change in political power, in our state government. And so that's why, we think sort of the most effective way to fight back against these attacks is to amend our state constitution to enshrine the fundamental right of all Virginians to reproductive freedom. This would protect abortion, contraception, fertility treatments, all of these aspects of reproductive health care, and would, prohibit the whims of politicians in the future from restricting those rights. So that's why we're working towards a constitutional amendment, and you'll hear later on about what that process looks like here in Virginia. But we think that that's the best way to fight back against these attacks on our freedoms, and to enshrine this right in our Constitution and our state's highest law, and protect it for generations to come.
Great, thanks, Jerry. Kenda, could you speak a bit to how some of these challenges that Jerry laid out particularly affect marginalized communities, and how the reproductive justice framework can guide our response?
Certainly. So marginalized communities, just for those who might not be familiar with what we're talking about people of color, low-income individuals, LGBTQIA folks, and those living in rural areas often face compounded challenges when it comes to reproductive health and rights. So you have a lot of different barriers, like economic barriers. Low-income individuals may struggle to afford reproductive health services, which also include contraception and abortion. Insurance coverage has been inadequate or non-existent. The cost of living, you have racial and health disparities. Healthcare access for people of color often experience barriers to accessing quality healthcare due to systemic racism and discrimination. You have cultural competency, which you can't be competent in any one culture. So we talk about cultural humility and the lack thereof that is inside of the healthcare systems. You have geographic barriers. Rural communities, individuals are underserved and may have very limited access to reproductive health clinics and services due to their geographic isolation. Let alone transportation is the issue for our rural communities, because you have to be able to get to the different locations. You have legal and policy barriers. Some state laws are very restrictive. And so that's the reason why we want to fight to make sure that in Virginia, we do have a constitutional amendment, which helps us to create reproductive freedom. You also have intersectional challenges. LGBTQIA individuals often face discrimination and lack of access to services. And people with disabilities also face the same and similar approaches. And so then you have the holistic support, you have equitable access, and these are the things that we want to see within the constitutional amendments that we're all striving to help push through.
Cool. Thanks so much for that, Kenda. And can you tell us a little bit more about the work of Birth and Color, and some of the some of the efforts that y'all do to kind of push our work forward?
Sure. So Birth and Color has a lot of different sectors. So we focus on racial bias training to healthcare providers and professionals, and that includes abortion, because abortion is healthcare. We also help assist those who do want to have children. So we have a large focus on the doula collective. We teach childbirth education, lactation support. We have a whole fathers program. We also work on policy and legislation to make sure that people of color have a voice when it comes to policy related matters, because that is very important. A lot of people talk about restoring Roe versus Wade, but for people of color, Roe was just the ceiling. It was just the floor. It was never the ceiling. And so when you think about, we still couldn't access it, which is why the abortion funds are so pivotal during these moments, is because they've been able to fill in that gap to help decrease that barrier.
And so we talked a little bit earlier about how folks can get involved with, the ACLU and doing that in this fight. What can folks do to get involved with Birth and Color and support your work?
Sure, and thank you for asking that, Mateo. You can visit our website, which is birthandcolor.org, and sign up to actually be a member to help volunteer. And then on all social media platforms, you can find us. We are called Birth and Color, and you can always just send an email and just ask us how you want to support, whatever way that looks like. We're willing to accept folks, especially during the time that we do have to fight for a constitutional amendment. We want to make sure that everyone's voices are heard.
Cool. Thank you for that. Jerry, so can you talk a little bit about the difference between a constitutional amendment and kind of like a legislative work and or litigation, and kind of like the difference between in that impact and like the structure?
Sure, yeah. So a constitutional amendment, which is, what we're all here talking about tonight, would go into our state constitution, which, contains a lot of the same rights and freedoms that we find in the US Constitution, Bill of Rights. Our state constitution has, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, those sorts of freedoms in there. But our state courts have never recognized a right to abortion or to reproductive freedom under our state constitution. So there's no state, analog to Roe v. Wade in Virginia. Some states have that. Some states' Supreme Courts have found that right to abortion in their own state constitution. We don't have that here. So what we need to do is to put it in there in plain language, in explicit terms, that says every Virginian has the right to reproductive freedom, and the government cannot interfere in these personal reproductive decisions. So that will prohibit our state legislature, no matter who holds power, from passing laws that would ban abortion, that would ban contraception, that would restrict access to fertility treatments, those sorts of things, or that would pass laws that discriminate against people based on their identities, or that would allow police and prosecutors to investigate and jail people for seeking reproductive health care, or for providing reproductive health care, or for helping people access reproductive health care. So, which is not unheard of in Virginia. There have been in recent history people who have been investigated and even charged with crimes based on their pregnancy outcomes. And nobody should face jail time or prison time for having a miscarriage, or for seeking an abortion, or any reproductive health care that they might need to access. So a constitutional amendment would prohibit those sorts of actions by our government. And then, litigation comes into play once we have that constitutional amendment. If, the government tries to pass laws that that we think can contradict or conflict with the constitutional amendment, or shouldn't be allowed under it. And we can use that constitutional amendment to expand, as Kendo was saying, to expand access, to ensure equity in access to reproductive health care for all Virginians. I hope that answers your question, Mateo.
No, it certainly does. Thanks, Jerry. So yeah, so these kind of been like we've kind of been living in the theoretical, right? And I think we want to ground some of this work a little bit. And so I'd love to bring our conversation to kind of a key moment in this discussion. We've got a powerful clip from Birth and Color movie. And this clip highlights some of the real life implications of this issue. We're going to take a few minutes to watch it. But before we do, Kendra, is there anything before we watch this that you want folks to know, or any kind of like context you want to give before we can roll into it?
Sure, I can give some context. So, with this documentary, we really wanted to highlight people's stories that was more than just abortion. It was really about all things reproductive health, all things that include like human rights, because we want people to understand that yes, we're fighting for abortions, but we're also fighting for a lot of things to be done with this constitutional amendment. So we want to make sure that we're covering people who have like lack of access to contraception, who need IVF, who've experienced a stillbirth, who's experienced loss. And so we wanted to make sure that people know that we're not leaving anyone out. And so I hope that you enjoy it.
Great. Thanks so much, Kenda. And so, yeah, with that, we're gonna have long shares share their screen and take a look.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
I tell people all the time, motherhood is a beautiful disaster. It is beautiful. All the things that you see on social media and all of that is beautiful. But the reality is, it's hard. You don't get a manual. It doesn't come with a playbook. You don't even know if you're doing it right. You literally just try your best. And sometimes that's not even good enough. It's hard. It's really hard, especially when you go into the teenage age. Sometimes we forget that we were teenagers. And also a lot of us in this generations we're trying to heal ourselves while being parents. So motherhood, it's a beautiful disaster. That's exactly what it is. In the beginning, of course, it's fun. You don't have to do too much. You know, you feed them, they're great. And then you get into this divide. You get into teenage years or preteen is already a lot, but teenage years is very different because you're literally seeing pretty much what you produce into the world. They're coming into that self. They're becoming adults, and you're seeing like traits in them that you do like, you don't like. And you're trying to figure out how to fix that, how to, just make it easier for them than what you had. So the stages, they're different. They all have their ups and downs, but it's definitely a process. In the beginning, it was super, not even an exaggeration of how hard it was. I didn't find out I was pregnant until I was 7.5 months. So I wasn't prepared at all. I didn't have anything. So, as I went along, of course, once you had the baby, everybody's just like telling you all the things what to do. I had already made in my mind I wasn't having any more kids. So my goal with the flow was like, I'm not having any more kids. So I want to do every single thing that my heart desires with this one kid because I'm never going to do it again. So I'm going to do it now. If it works, it works. If it don't, we're going to scratch it and start over. But this is my one chance.
I heard you say that you did not find out something.
First of all, I was a teenager. So I didn't know my body. I just living life. And it was right when my mom died. So I had no regard for anything, honestly. And the very first time I had an abortion, I got pregnant. And of course, in your mind, when you have sex, you don't get pregnant. In my mind, I wasn't thinking that. I was a teenager. I had no signs. I gained no weight at all. And I actually went to the clinic and they told me, they were like, oh, you're only like 3 weeks. I'm like, okay, great. I went to Regional Memorial. They pulled out. I told them that I wasn't keeping it. Pulled out the ultrasound machine. That's a whole thing. I was like, man, no. I found out end of November. I had my son in February.
Tell me your personal story with reproductive health.
Yes. At one point, I was supposed to be getting an abortion. And before that, I was actually on birth control. And so when I was on birth control, of course, I was only on it for my periods to lighten them up because they were excruciating. It was ridiculous, the flow and all of that. And so what we ended up doing was taking, I believe it was low estrogen at that point. And when I was taking it, it was giving me many strokes. And so my arm would go numb, my vision would go blurry, I would have migraines, and sometimes I would have to pull over because I just could not see to drive. And so when that did happen, I found out that it might be something called TIA, which are pretty much strokes that you have. And so when I went to go have the procedure done for the abortion, they pretty much told me that it could have been TIA. And the only option I had was to go on a lower dosage of the birth control, which at that point would have been, to me, unnecessary because I knew what I needed it for. And so it was an interesting situation. Of course, I ended up getting pregnant after I got off of the birth control, which for those who are unable to take birth control because maybe they do have TIA or the mini strokes, or it's not suffice for them as far as an option to stop their periods, or not even to stop, to slow it down. We sometimes don't have the option of birth control because it doesn't work for us. And it kind of has the reverse effect on us, or the cons outweigh the pros of the birth control. And so going to a lower dosage or even another birth control doesn't always solve the problem. And so kind of telling somebody that birth control is the option to kind of prevent an abortion or prevent to prevent a birth that you do not want at that moment is not the option for everybody. So we all have different stories. We all have different bodies. We all make our own decisions for our bodies. And that was the decision I made, which was to get off of the birth control because it was not healthy for me and it did not prove to be a positive effect on me at all. So the providers were not really aware. The first time I think I had told a provider was when I was going in the clinic to get the abortion. And that's when they let me know that it was probably TIA. When it happened, I want to say the second time, because it happened to me twice. The second time it happened, the only thing I was told was, if it happens again, go get a scan, go to neuro and see if they can see what's going on, because it needs to be actively going on for them to see anything and to treat it. Of course, as soon as I got off the birth control, I ended up not having them anymore because I had gotten off the birth control. So it was only the provider of the person at the clinic, as well as whomever I talked to, which I believe was my OBGYN at the time, to let her know, and only she could tell me what to go and see a neurologist if it occurred again.
Thank you so much, James, for playing those videos for us. Excuse me. And so just a real quick reminder, if you all have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A function, or if you're having difficulty with that, please feel free to throw them up in the chat. But that being said, Kenda, as somebody featured in this really powerful film, can you share a little bit about your experience and why you believe stories like this are so important in the fight for reproductive justice?
Sure. So this was a partnership really between Birth in Color and ACLU to bring these stories to life. And so we wanted to make sure that we used real people's stories because this is real life. And in order to create change, you have to be able to use voices so that they can tell their stories so that people can actually understand the fight. And understand what other people are going through. Not everyone can have the luxuries of life. And so that's why this was so important. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to pick like several different stories because everyone's story truly matters. And some things people have never heard of, like a lot of people have never heard of TIA, including healthcare system. And so, going through that is very difficult when you don't know who to help you. And so we wanted to really show what that impact looked like so that people know, like, okay, we're fighting for reproductive freedom for this very reason. We're fighting for reproductive freedom because unfortunately, not everyone's body allows them to have a baby, allows them to get pregnant. And so that's why it was really, really important. And just to hear the stories and to be able to support the people who these stories belong to was really, really near and dear to my heart of like, hey, let's put it together. And so that's the real reason and the real driver behind all of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Candace. So we got a couple of questions that have come up. I want to throw this one to you, Jerry. Since the Dobbs decision, has Virginia rolled back access to abortion?
Not yet. Luckily, not yet. So, in Virginia, abortion is legal up through the end of the second trimester. And then in the third trimester, it's legal in certain cases where the health or life of the pregnant person is seriously threatened or at stake, basically. And in the third trimester, you have to get 3 doctors to certify that. So very difficult to get an abortion in the third trimester here in Virginia, but that has been the law for a long time. It remains the law to this day. We think Virginia can do better with its laws around abortion and other aspects of reproductive health care to make it easier and more accessible for people to get the health care that they need when they need it. And all people, to be able to access that. But at this point, our laws remain the same, even as we see other states in the South around us banning abortion, and we're seeing more and more people come from those states to Virginia to access that health care.
Cool, thank you. And this is a bit of an add-on, but I'll open this up to both of y'all for your thoughts. Besides supporting a constitutional amendment, what can someone like me do to secure reproductive freedom in Virginia?
I would say follow both organizations during General Assembly time. General Assembly is typically what we call in session, when we are going to fight for legislation or oppose legislation. And last year, several bans did come up and we had to fight them back down in order to keep Virginia safe. So definitely, if you have stories, we definitely want to be able to highlight your story. We definitely want you to be able to reach out to your local legislators and say like, hey, this is an important issue for you. We want you to come out to different events to celebrate with us. Those are different ways that you can fight without fighting for a constitutional amendment if you want to.
Yeah, totally agree. That was very well said, Kenda. Yeah, it's people power is fueling this movement right now. We need everybody that has the ability and the willingness to come out, talk to legislators, make your voices heard in whatever way you can. Supporting any organization you can that's doing this work. And talking to legislators, talking to other elected officials, sharing stories, all of anything that's within your capacity to do, no matter how small or how large, is needed. This is a full court press right now, and we need everybody on board.
And I think speaking of everybody, but I'll direct this to you, Kenda. But I think Jerry, if you have any thoughts too, we'd love to hear them. So, are there any other like partner organizations or any other groups that are kind of in this fight with us? Like, do we have not to say necessarily a direct coalition, but are there any other orgs that kind of working on this work alongside you at Birth and Color?
Sure. So actually, all of our organizations do partner with each other, especially when it comes to General Assembly. And when it comes to this constitutional amendment, it's going to take multiple of us. So you have organizations like Birth and Color, ACLU, you have Repro Rising, you have Planned Parenthood, and that's just to name a few. I think those are the most the organizations that specifically are in this fight. And there are some more, but we typically all keep and look at each other's policy agenda and make sure that we're uplifting each other's work.
Great. And just one last question that popped up in the Q&A section. Does Medicare and Medicaid pay for abortions?
I will let Jerry answer that question because that's it's a twofold question, and so I will let her answer it.
Yeah, I don't believe Medicare pays for abortions. Medicaid does not pay for abortions, except, and I always get, so there are two cases in Virginia where public funds can be used, state funds can be used to pay for abortions, and those are in cases where I think the pregnant person's life is at stake, in cases of rape or incest that has been reported to either law enforcement or a public health agency, or in cases where there's a severe fetal anomaly such that it basically fatal to the fetus. And so in those cases, for people who are eligible for Medicaid, there is state funding that will cover the abortion. But those are very sort of narrow circumstances, and in the vast majority of cases, there is no public funding for abortion in Virginia. And so people either have to cover those costs themselves or seek assistance from an abortion fund to help cover the costs of the medication or the procedure.
Thanks for that, Jerry. And I think, kind of, in that same vein, I think talking, in talking about abortion funds, when we talk about some of, some of these issues, like, I think, when the rubber meets the road, like, really, like, what does access to these services like really look like, and where can people turn to for help if they are having economic issues, or if they're having just difficulty accessing services?
I would say you can reach out to any of the community partners that I listed before, and we can all like help to put you in a position that will be helpful. But the abortion funds do have resources available. And then you do have clinics like Planned Parenthood and Whole Women's Health Alliance, who actually have like different types of funds and services and things like that that are available to you.
Cool, thank you. And I think one last question. Um, in this work, and I'm going to open this up to both of y'all. How do you fight kind of the other side's false narrative about this work and access to these services? When I say other side, like the right. You
So typically I fight with facts and stories. Stories are definitely our power, which is why we always want people to share their stories. It gives us ammunition to say like, actually that's false. Let me tell you what someone else went through, because they will say like, oh, this is available and this is available, and when those things are not true. Even when it comes to racial bias and like in the healthcare system, just in general. And then also standing on facts. They will spin a whole narrative, even like with the fake pregnancy care centers and all of the things that people are going to, thinking that, hey, I'm gonna get an abortion, and then they're trying to trap people into keeping their children, even if they don't want to. And so I use that as the ammunition, because we can be truthful in the work that we do provide and that we do stand on. We shouldn't be able to stand on false narratives. And so that's what I like to use as my power.
Yeah, I will echo that. And I think, what we've seen is that those who want to restrict reproductive freedom and abortion have been going back to the same, false narratives for years and years and years. And people are understanding that these are scare tactics, that these are outright lies, that these are made up concepts and fears. And the more people that come out and share their stories, their own personal stories about needing this healthcare and either being able to get it and how that impacted them, or not being able to get it and how that impacted them, is really, I think, doing the most work towards pushing back against these false narratives.
Well, thanks everyone for your thoughtful questions, and thank you so much to Jerry and Kenda for kind of being the line of fire, and and your really insightful and thoughtful answers. So this has been a really great discussion. I really hope that it's deepened everyone's our understanding of reproductive freedom and justice. As we move forward tonight, let's remember that this conversation is just the beginning. We have the power to make real change in Virginia, and that starts with each of us committing to take action. I want to hand it over to Brianna and Kenda to guide us through the next part of our program. Thanks again, y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mateo, for moderating that incredibly insightful conversation on what reproductive freedom is, reproductive justice is, what that means in Virginia, our current political environment regarding access to reproductive health care, but in particular abortion, and sharing real stories of Virginians and their experiences with the reproductive health care system. Of course, the constitutional amendment that I'm about to walk through together with Kenda. I know you already heard a little bit about it, and we've got some questions about like, so what does it cover? What does it do? And like, how can I like get involved? And those are amazing questions. They're definitely the questions we want to hear. And so we're gonna walk you through what the constitutional amendment can do, how we get one through the Virginia government, and actions you can take. But I think before I go into that rant, I failed to introduce myself. My name is Brianna Diaz. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm the Policy and Legislative Counsel for ACLU of Virginia. So I have the honor and pleasure to work with Jerry, with Kenda, Mateo, and everybody on this whole effort to pass a constitutional amendment on reproductive freedom, which you can see in our right here. But with that, I'll get us moving. So kind of returning to the initial question of like, why do we need a constitutional amendment? So Jerry and Kenda, again, like really like laid the groundwork as to why we need one. We have successfully defeated efforts to restrict or outright ban abortion in Virginia. Access to abortion, access to contraception, and other types of reproductive health care are not a recognized right at the federal or state level. And even where we have expanded access to abortion in recent years in Virginia, we know that access isn't real for all Virginians, and particularly Black, Brown, LGBTQ, immigrant, and low economic folks with low economic situations, or like in healthcare deserts, like Kenda has touched on, right? And so the constitutional amendment is one way to secure the right to abortion and other forms of reproductive health care, and to continue to push for true access for all. And so, that's a little bit about the why. And so a constitutional amendment is why a constitutional amendment versus like a code or a bill, something that like Birth and Color is a champion on every single session, expanding access to like maternal health care, and the ACLU is happy to partner with on those efforts and others. So why a constitutional amendment instead of a bill? Well, a constitutional amendment is the most robust protection we can secure for reproductive rights. And so while laws can change with the political winds and who sits in our General Assembly and who occupies the governor's mansion, an amendment enshrines those rights in our state's highest document, our state constitution, which makes it much harder for future legislators or the governor to undermine them. And again, as I said, in recent years, we've seen alarming attempts to roll back reproductive rights. We saw an outright ban. We saw a 6-week ban, a 15-week ban, all failed, fortunately, due to the work of the folks on this call today, and I'm sure you all as well. And like these efforts underscore the need for us to take proactive steps to ensure that the right to make personal decisions about our bodies is protected. So I don't know, Kenda, did you want to add anything to that about like YICA?
No, that was perfect. Nothing needs to be added to that at all.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, so then like what is the constitutional amendment process? Because we keep saying we got to do the thing, but like how do we do it? And so we have this timeline, or kind of like this process that I'm going to quickly walk through with you all. And so here in Virginia, we operate as a legislative referral state. And so to amend our state constitution, we have a bit of a different process than other states do, who can just do straight ballot initiatives, which is like citizens have to get X number of signatures to get a ballot placed, to get an issue placed on their ballot, that then all citizens of that state vote on whether to have it, have that ballot or that amendment on the ballot added to the Constitution or not. I know we're probably more familiar with that in states like Michigan, Ohio, Florida, Texas. A lot of states follow that. Well, here in Virginia, we do not. We have something called the legislative referral process. And what that means is that the constitutional amendment language is introduced in our legislative session, right? So our standard legislative session where bills are introduced every year, so does the constitutional amendment. And so for the constitutional amendment on reproductive freedom, that would look like it being introduced in the 2025 General Assembly session, which starts January of 2025. If it passes that session once, it must pass another legislative session again. But between that first passage in 2025 and that second passage in 2026, there has to be an intervening House of Delegates election. And the House of Delegates are all up for election in November of 2025. So it's like, it's not enough for us to get this constitutional amendment through the legislature. We have to also win an election to maintain a pro-reproductive freedom majority to get that thing through the finish line. So let's say in best case scenario that we are all working towards, the constitutional amendment passes in 2025. We maintain a pro-reproductive freedom majority in the House in November of 2025. We then introduce the amendment, the same amendment again, and it passes in 2026. And only then does it get to go to the November 2026 ballot for Virginians to vote on. That is at least a 2-year process. Yeah, that emoji is exactly my face every time I look at this graphic. It's just, we don't get it. But that's the process all constitutional amendments in Virginia must go through. And that's what we're currently in the midst of working on the language that will get introduced in 2025, working together with other reproductive rights, health, justice, and freedom organizations, as well as LGBTQ organizations, immigrant rights organizations, and providers and patients themselves to get us through this long process. And like one final detail, because I usually get this question, because the amendment is introduced in the legislature, does that mean the governor can veto it? The answer is no. Amendments do not go to the governor. They just go through the General Assembly. So we don't got to worry about who sits there. I mean, like we should generally, but like for this, like we don't have to go there. But still, it is critical that we maintain a pro-reproductive freedom majority in the House to get this amendment all the way to the finish line and to the ballot for you, Virginian voters, to vote on it so we can protect reproductive freedom here in Virginia. All right. So I know I said a lot, but so I kind of spoke about like why and the process, but I know we want to take some time to also talk through like, well, then what do we want to see in a reproductive freedom constitutional amendment? And so Kenda, did you want to share more about the values and components of the constitutional amendment that we're fighting for?
Sure. But before I do that, I want to uplift again what she said. So we will be in an election because it's an election year. So we need all of you to be paying attention because we're going to have to canvass, make sure that we're talking about reproductive health on the ballot when we are voting. That is going to be essential to getting this done. Now, to the values and components of the constitutional amendment. We want to make sure that bodily autonomy is there. The right for every individual to make their own decisions. We should not be allowing the government to make decisions about our bodies and what we're going to do. That is a no-no. Access to healthcare should be in this amendment. Everyone has the right to healthcare, no matter what your situation looks like. And we will be able to lower our disparities when it comes to healthcare if everyone has access to it. Black women are 3 times more likely to die during childbirth than their counterparts. So let's make sure that this is a part of the reproductive freedom that we're talking about when we're doing when we're working on the constitutional amendment. Also, equality and justice. The recognition that reproductive rights are essential to achieving equality and justice for all. So then that goes back to the reproductive justice framework, making sure that everything that intersects with reproductive justice will be in this constitutional amendment so that we can have reproductive freedom in the state of Virginia. And those are the qualities and components that we are really fighting for when it comes to the CA. There's a lot of different layers and levels and like different things that we want to make sure is included. And so this is why we need your stories. This is why we need you to fight alongside us. This is why we need you to show up, because your stories matter. And for the sake of the children and the youth, we want to make sure that they don't have to fight the same fight that we're fighting right now. And I'll hand it back over to you, Brianna.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kenda, for outlining the core components of a constitutional amendment and like the values that we are fighting for in that constitutional amendment. I mean, that's really it, right? We want to ensure that that right is protected long term, that we're expanding access for folks, and that we're fighting to ensure that the restrictions we saw in years past, like coercive and biased quote informed like consent practices, waiting periods, like invasive, like not medically necessary processes before someone can receive health care, that those things never come back in Virginia. So thank you again for outlining all of that. But I think with that, I turn it back to Mary to help us with how we all can take action today to fight for a reproductive freedom constitutional amendment.
Thank you, both Brianna and Kenda. I do this every day and I still feel like I learned a lot, and that was really fantastic. So we're going to wrap this up. We really appreciate you all spending your Wednesday evening with us. But it is essential that we finish with a real call to action, because there's an awful lot of work, as you heard, that needs to be done. And we're going to need to multiply our impact and to reach beyond the folks who are here on this call this evening. So here is what we are asking you to do right now, and that is to pull out your phone. Yes, literally right now. Think of 3 people in your life. Pull out your phone. I actually have 2 phones, so you can't see them because I've got this. Okay. And I'm gonna send 6 messages, but think of 3 people in your life, friends, family, colleagues, who share your values and who you believe would stand with us in this fight for reproductive freedom in Virginia. So we're asking you to take a moment to send them a quick message, a text, an email, even a direct message on social media, whatever it is that you do to communicate with people. Ask them to join you in signing the Reproductive Freedom Pledge. It can be as simple as, hey, friend, I just attended a powerful reproductive freedom summit and I am so fired up. Can you take a moment to sign the Reproductive Freedom Pledge? It is a small step that can make such a big difference in Virginia. And here's the link. And so we've got that up for you. And we are going to ask you to literally take a couple of minutes to do that now. So I'm going to give you a minute and I'm going to sit here and type a quick text to someone that I know is values aligned, but who's not working on this issue, and try to encourage them to get excited and involved about this. And I ask you to just take a moment and do the same. We're going to ask you to send it to 3 people, but it's okay if you send it to even more. And I see all of our folks on the screen are typing away and sending, so we appreciate that. And please Even after we wrap up, feel free to continue to send those messages because it's important. We need you all as activists, and we need your networks and friends and colleagues and relatives to get involved here. So I will thank you for taking that step. Each of these messages that you sent and hopefully will continue to send is a ripple that will lead to real and tangible change. But we are not stopping there. In the next couple of weeks, you and other pledge takers will receive an action alert from us. This will be another chance to contact your state legislators and to urge them to support the constitutional amendment for reproductive freedom. Even though the legislature is not yet in session, we really want them to be hearing from their citizenry as they lead up to this session that will begin in January. We will provide you with all of the information and tools you need to make your voice heard. If you have questions, certainly reach out to us. But imagine the power we have if everyone here tonight engages a few more people in this cause. Together, we can build a groundswell of support that is just impossible to ignore. And before we close, I want to extend a heartfelt thanks to each one of you for being here and for your commitment to this movement. Your energy and dedication are what will make the difference in securing reproductive rights for all Virginians. Please keep an eye in your inbox for an upcoming action alert. Continue to spread the word within your networks. We're counting on you to help turn this momentum into real change. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists for your really illuminating contributions. Thank you all for being here tonight. Let's continue the fight for reproductive freedom in Virginia together. Thank you.
Panelists, great job. That was amazing. You can all be free to enjoy the rest of your evening. I'll be sending out thank you notes tomorrow, also with some debrief material so that we can learn from this and talk about what the next steps are.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate y'all.
Awesome. Y'all crushed it.
Bye.